Hello and welcome to Vic Gardner's Office Hours. Today we're going to talk about appearance theory. My name is John Kowalski. I'm part of the marketing team here at Vic Gardner, and I got my friend Bill Shakespeare here too. He's helping out. But anyway, today our presenter, Corey Cohen, he's our senior applications specialist. He'll be presenting. If you're unfamiliar with our office hours format, we start with a brief or shortened presentation, maybe 20, 25 minutes on appearance theory. And then the rest of the time is yours. We open it up to Q&A. If you have questions, comments, any challenges at your own facility that we can help with, please put it down in the chat area, bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Just log those in and we'll get to them immediately following the presentation. And if for some reason we run out of time, we will contact you independently and get your questions answered. Also, we are recording this, so immediately following the presentation, you'll receive a link. Feel free to take a look at it. Down the road, share it with colleagues, whatever you'd like to do. So with that, let me introduce Corey Cohen. Corey, take it away, sir. We might need to unmute. Oh, there you are.
Okay.
Haha.
Hello, everybody. Just thought I'd let you get a glimpse of all this before I get started. I don't have Bill Shakespeare here with me, but I do have lots of Mickey, if I could show you that, because my kid just had a birthday party. He's 2. So yeah, me and Mickey are going to go ahead and give you a very brief presentation on the Wavescan technology. I know appearance theory is a little bit ambiguous. Appearance can mean several things, but we do have some office hours coming up on gloss and on haze. So today I thought we'd focus on the Wavescan. So we go ahead and turn my camera off and get started. Okay, so here we're talking about very high gloss surfaces, high gloss paint jobs mostly, but this also can apply to things like plastic films. We're looking here at a car body, and when we have very glossy, very highly reflective surfaces like that, appearance can be influenced by the waviness, the sort of micro structures in the surface can cause this wavy effect that affects how we see the surface. And that presents in sort of 2 categories of ways. One is the waviness, and what is commonly referred to in the industry as orange peel, because it has the appearance of the surface of an orange. So here we have 2, let me turn my pointer on. Here we have 2 surfaces side by side, and this would be considered a fairly smooth surface. So it has these lines projected, these lines of light projected onto it, so we can sort of see the waviness. And this would be considered a pretty smooth surface. And this here on the right would be considered a surface with high orange peel. These 2 images at the bottom are not correct. I apologize. Sometimes when these presentations get uploaded to this platform, they don't always translate correctly. So we should be seeing a sort of brilliant, what we would refer to as a brilliant surface on the left, or one that has good DOI. DOI is distinctness of image. So it's, if you look at your reflection in the surface of one of these surfaces, it's how crisp and clear and bright and good looking the reflected image would be. And here on the right, this would be an example of a kind of a hazy surface with not so good DOI. I'm sorry, you don't have anything to really compare that to. And so the reason that we see this wavy light dark pattern has to do with how the light bounces off the surface. So any light source is going to have some thickness to it. Even the light coming from the sun, which we consider generally to be a point source, there is going to be thickness to that light beam, which means you're going to have different light rays that can bounce off of the surface at different angles. And it's the different angles and the way they hit your eye in different ways that sort of cause that wavy light dark pattern. So this is sort of what we're trying to target with these the measurements of this type of surface. So the effect we get when we look at a surface like this depends pretty heavily on the distance from the surface. We're going to be able to see different things. We're going to make out different sizes of structures, and it's going to have a different effect on our eyes depending on how far away we are. So generally, when we are evaluating the very fine structures of the surface, we want to be pretty close to it at a distance of about 40 centimeters. And then when we're evaluating the more orange peely type effect, we want to be further away, usually at a few meters. And you can see this is the same surface right here. So you can see the differences when we're looking at it from real up close versus far away. And up close, we can see the finer structures in the surface, the structures that might contribute to a lower distinctness of image, or what we would refer to as shortwave structures. And then over here on the right, where those long wave structures, the larger structures, are going to be more apparent to us, and that's what causes that orange peel effect. And this is just kind of a nifty little visual for you. I kind of like this, where over the left, you're sort of zoomed in and you can see, more sort of the individual structures up close. And then as you zoom further out, you're getting more of a pattern that's formed by these structures. And so on the left, you're kind of seeing the trees, so to speak, and on the right, you're seeing more of the forest. And this is why we see different things at different distances, because of the resolution of the human eye and how that changes depending on how close we are to what we're looking at. So when we're 40 centimeters away, our peak resolution, the structures that we're going to be best at seeing, are in the about 2 millimeter size range. So we're seeing the smaller structures there, and then when we zoom out, we step out to about a 3 meter distance. We're seeing structures in like the 12, 15 millimeter size range is sort of where the peak is. So we're making out, again, the larger structures when we're further away, and when we are closer up, we can make out the smaller structures. And that brings us to the measurement principle of the device, the instrument we have to measure these effects, and that is called the Wavescan. So the Wavescan is a rolling instrument. If you've ever seen one, it does resemble somewhat like a little toy car, kind of. It has 4 wheels on it. It's meant to be rolled across the surface. So it's not like a spectrophotometer or a gloss meter that's you're just measuring one point. This one, because of the nature of these types of measurements, it requires that you rolled across the surface. In general, there's an exception to that, but in general, it requires that you roll it across the surface. So it can sort of better make out these different structures, and B, just because different parts of a surface are going to give different effects, and you really need to get a good length of surface to measure across to really get a good picture of what's going on. So you roll this across the surface, and it scans the surface. It scans the structures in the surface and creates this optical profile. And the way it's actually doing that is it has a laser light source that is being pointed down at this surface at an angle of 20 degrees. And as it rolls across the surface, the sort of angle in the surface, depending on the structures in the surface, is either going to cause that light beam to widen or to narrow. And so we have a sensor that's going to measure this effect, and that's what creates this optical profile that we get. And then we can apply mathematical filters to separate that optical profile into different scales that are useful to us, beginning with the long.
This man's there, huh? Sorry about that. Joys of working from home, folks. Well, we're waiting for Corey to come back too. We're starting to get questions in. That's great. Keep them coming. So when when Corey's done with the presentation part, we'll just dive right into the questions. If we need to elaborate on the questions too, I'll let you know if we can unmute you and just have a discussion.
All right, guys, I'm back. Sorry
right.
about that. My dog had a vet appointment this morning for which he had to be sedated, and he is in outer space right now. So apologies for that. Hopefully we can continue. So yeah, yes. All right, back to it. Optical profile, mathematical filters that separate it into shortwave and long wave. So these were the initial Wavescan scales that the first model of Wavescan outputted. These long wave and shortwave and just a few other scales that were calculated from these values. And so here we can see an example of a couple surfaces. I'm glad these were able to render correctly, and the shortwave and long wave measurements for each. And so we can see with sample A, this would be considered a fairly smooth looking surface. And we have relatively low shortwave and long wave structures, measurements. And then we have sample B, which is a much worse looking surface. Oops. What just happened there? Okay, back to this. All right, sample B, which is much worse looking, and correspondingly, it does have a higher short wave is pretty similar, but a much higher long wave value, which is causing that orange peel effect that we're getting here. There we go. And then we have sample C and sample D with a different set of shortwave and long wave measurements. And so in general, I would evaluate these as sample C being wavier. If I just had to, say which one is wavier, I would say sample C is wavier than sample D. However, we are seeing that sample C has significantly lower long wave than sample D, and that's really what orange peel is pretty well correlated to in general. But we can see that this is an issue because these two numbers are not giving us enough. It's not telling us enough about the surface to really be able to differentiate them, as we can see from this example. And so that optical profile was then taken and split into finer categories of structures. And these are the W values that we get out of the instrument, W, A, B, C, D, E. WA tells us how much structure there is in the 0.1 to 0.3 millimeter size range. WB is 0.3 to 1 millimeter. WC is 1 to 3. WD 3 to 10 millimeters. And then WE covers those really large structures, relatively large structures in the 1 to 3 centimeter range. And so this gives us sort of better resolution for our measurements, which tells us more about what's going on here. And so now this makes a little bit more sense when we look at sample C and sample D with just the long wave measurement. Long wave is represented by this pinkish block here. And so it's this is what we refer to as the structure spectrum. And so for long wave, it's really just giving us the area under the curve in this range for that long wave value, and it's going to be higher for sample D than for sample C, even though sample D or sample C looks wavier than sample D. But when we break it down into these finer categories, these W values, we can see that sample C is actually getting significantly higher shortwave, as well as here in the WD and the WE is actually higher for this sample C than it is for sample D, even though sample D has a higher long wave value corresponding to the area under this part of the curve here. So we can see that with these finer categories of structure sizes, it's telling us more about the surface, and we're better able to predict just based on the numbers which one is going to look better. And then comes DOI. Again, this is distinctness of image. Here we do have two good images for you to look at. So on the left, this would be a surface with good DOI. And you can see that this building that's being reflected is nice and crisp and clear and bright. And then this image over here on the right has poor DOI, poor distinctness of image, and we're getting a much fuzzier looking image, reflected image. And so when we look at the measurement of the structures compared to how the surface actually looks, we can see that, again, this isn't really telling the whole story. We're getting some light scattering from these structures we're measuring with the Wavescan in the 0.1 to 0.1 to 1 or so millimeter size range. And that is the lower limit of the W scales. It can resolve structures down to 0.1 millimeter. But it's really the light scattering that's happening with those very, very fine microstructures that's causing that reduction in the contrast and the distortion of the outlines. Distortion of outlines, largely small wave structures, and contrast reduction in the less than 0.1 millimeter range. And so we need a way to measure that, because that laser light measurement principle of the Wavescan doesn't do it by itself. And this is where the dullness measurement comes in. So the way this is a separate measurement system within the Wavescan. So the Wavescan does measure this, but it's a completely separate measurement principle from that laser light source principle. And the way it works is it has a camera built in, and it has an LED that's going to shine a circle of light onto the surface, and then that camera is going to take a picture of the reflection of that light. And so here, if we look at that image, it's shining the light inside this smaller green circle, and then the camera is detecting how much light is reflected back between the smaller and the larger circles. And the more light that appears between those two circles, the more scattering there is. And that value is taken into account when measuring or when calculating what we refer to as the dullness value. So dullness is essentially how much light scattering there is caused by the very fine microstructures in the surface that are too small to see with the human eye or with the other Wavescan measurement principle. And so there are a couple advantages to this dullness measurement. This type of measurement it's somewhat similar to gloss and somewhat similar to reflection haze, but it's different from both. And some of the advantages are that it is independent of the material that you're measuring, which is not true for gloss measurements. Gloss measurements are going to depend on the refractive index of the material you're measuring, such that you can have two materials that look like they have the same gloss, but if they have different refractive indices, if you measure those surfaces with a gloss meter, you're going to get different answers despite the fact that they look the same. So the dullness measurement is independent of the refractive index of the material. And it also works well on curved surfaces, which is another pretty big obstacle to getting accurate or consistent gloss measurements. So this dullness measurement is pretty robust. And so that completes the structure spectrum measured by this Wavescan. So we have the WA through WE, which gives us the various structure sizes that can be resolved by the human eye. But when we need to know about those very fine structures, the ones we can't see individually with the naked eye, because those are the ones that are largely going to influence the dullness or the haziness or the DOI of the surface. And so the DOI calculation very heavily takes the dullness into account, but is also influenced by the WA and the WB. So the Wavescan it's a QC tool, of course, to make sure that your production is consistent, but it can also help with various in various ways along the entire production process, and it can be used as a sort of development and R&D tool as well, because it can help you measure things like the substrate quality, the paint materials themselves, and the process that you're using, and all those things are going to influence the final look of the surface. So here we have some examples of some structure spectra and the corresponding picture of each surface that was measured to get that spectrum. So here is our initial surface, and this is a pretty horrible looking surface. This is not what you would want your car body or your boat, motorcycle, whatever to look like. And we can see if we look at the structure spectrum, we're getting pretty high structure across the board, high shortwave, long wave, and that's what's contributing to this very high waviness that we're seeing. So we want to improve this surface, and there are several ways we can go about doing that. One is to optimize the clear coat application. It's been shown that the higher clear coat thickness, higher film build for clear coat tends to bring down the long wave values, the long wave structures, the WCDE. It's going to smooth out those larger structures and bring that spectrum way down in the longer wave range. Not so much with the shorter wave structures, but with the long wave, it's going to serve to bring that way down. And so that's reducing drastically that sort of orange peely effect we get from this surface here. But it's also sort of revealing this sort of sandy looking surface, sandy looking effect to the surface that we're seeing here. And that's because, and this is a pretty important concept, these various structure sizes sort of balance each other out when it comes to the overall look of the surface. And so now that we've gotten rid of all of the, or a significant amount of the longer wave structures, these shorter wave structures are dominating, and that's why we're seeing this sort of sandy look that is also fairly unappealing. So now we're going to take that. This is the surface we just saw before on the bottom. Now it's on the top, and we want to, again, improve this surface, except this time we're going to do it by sanding the primer. So again, every step along the way, from the substrate to the various coatings, to the top coat, to the clear coat, can all have an effect on the final look of the surface. So in this instance, we're going to sand down the primer in order to bring that short wave way down. And that gives us a much better sort of wet look. The brilliance of the surface is better. We're not getting that sandy look anymore. But again, now that we've drastically reduced the short wave, that orange peel effect is sort of rearing its ugly head again. Now the long wave is dominating again because there's not enough short wave to cover for it. And so this actually is not a very appealing looking surface either. And so to improve the look of this surface, what we're going to actually do is optimize the top coat application in order to actually bring the short wave back up a little bit, because this is going to help balance out those shorter structures with the longer structures, and that's going to result in a better looking surface overall. So it is largely about balance. There are a lot of different scales that are calculated in the Wavescan. Most of them are just various combinations of the dullness, long wave, short wave, and the various W values. And because they balance each other in various ways, it is important to take multiple values into account. And in general, we do want the short wave, when we're looking at the structure spectrum, we want the short wave to be somewhat higher than the long wave. Generally, we look at the WB and the WD values, and we want the WB to be somewhat higher than the WD. Very, very rough convention, we would say maybe a 3-to-2 ratio, but that is very dependent on the overall structure in the surface, what the exact ratio would be. So there's this is just those same pictures shown again in its various stages. We took this very, very wavy surface and optimized the clear coat to bring down those longer structures, and that gave it a sandy look. And then we brought down the shortwave structures by sanding the primer to make the primer smoother before putting on the top coat. And that gave it a more brilliant look, better wet look. But also because the shortwave was brought down a little too much, that revealed the orange peel on the surface. And so the top coat application was then optimized to actually provide a little more shortwave structures that it better balanced the long wave structures and gave it a better overall look. And there we go. That's your presentation for today. I apologize again for the interruptions. Plenty of time to get to some questions.
Yeah.
Back to you.
All right, good stuff, Corey. As always. First question here, and it's directed at the Wavescan, the instrument. Is there any affectation of the wheel condition to the wave profile, or doesn't it matter? The wheel's condition to the wave profile.
Yeah, sure that can have an effect. Certainly if the wheels wear down too much, they would need to be replaced. I think that's, something that generally is required after so many years, probably a good number of years. These things are built to last. Yeah, it certainly could have an effect. One thing I have heard is that our newer line of Wavescan instruments, we just updated our Wavescan line after a good number of years, and the measurement principle in the newer line is pretty much the same as the old one. So it's just a very solid principle. There's really not much to improve there, but I have heard that the stability is better, and that there's going to be less influence on the measurements due to operator influence, how heavily you might be pressing on the device, or the conditions of the wheels as well. So if that's something you're concerned about, get yourself a Wavescan 3.
Nice. Next question from Daniel here. What is the gloss level limit on performing analysis of DOI? Can DOI be measured on surfaces with very low gloss levels?
Not very low gloss levels. And this is always a tricky question to answer, because we do say that that this can only be done on higher gloss surfaces, but really the limiting factor is actually the dullness. So it's how diffusing the surface is, which again is pretty heavily correlated with gloss. But I don't have any defined gloss parameters, because that does depend on the surface, but I can give you some guidelines as far as the dullness. Let me have some slide for that somewhere, if you'll allow me a second to pull it up.
See what you can find in your bag of tricks there.
Mm-hmm. It's a big bag, which can make it difficult sometimes.
Definitely. I caught glimpses.
There we are. I'm going to switch to screen sharing.
There we go.
All right, you're seeing this, John?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, so this is comparing our old Wavescan DOI instrument with our Wavescan dual instrument, but this is actually accurate when talking about our Wavescan dual, which the new version of that is called the Wavescan 3 dual, versus our just plain old Wavescan 3, or if you have one of our previous generation Wavescan 2 instruments. This is the difference between the Wavescan 2 or 3 versus the Wavescan Dual or 3 Dual. And that is the range of dullnesses that it's capable of measuring. So with the old, or I should say with the Wavescan 2 or 3, we're looking at optimally you want to be in the range of 0 to 40 dullness. If you're in the range of 40 to 55 dullness, that is going to be measurable, but not comparable. This is not the optimal range for the Wavescan, and so there's a setting you have to turn off in the Wavescan in order to get it to measure in this range. But that's the highest range, the highest dullness it can measure with the Wavescan 2 or the 3 or the micro Wavescan. Or if you have one of these very older generation Wavescan DOIs. The Wavescan dual models, however, the optimal range for them, it goes up to 65 dullness. So you can measure into higher dullness ranges, which means lower gloss ranges. Of course, that's going to correlate. And then you have this, again, this yellow area where it's not optimal. The results of surfaces that you measure in this range, in this dullness range, are not going to be directly comparable to surfaces you measure in this dullness range. But it can be measured up to 80 dullness if you turn that same setting off in the Wavescan Dual. And then beyond that, it is just the laser light principle kind of breaks down. There's just too much diffusion in the surface and won't allow you to measure surfaces with that high dullness.
Okay, great, thank you. Question from Chris, follow up on the wheel condition. Is using the Wavescan reading off of a conveyor versus something that's stationary, that's also something to take into consideration, yes?
Yes. Conveyors, I mean, it depends on how fast the conveyor is going, but yeah, it is done on a conveyor. There are plants that take readings on conveyors. As long as the conveyor itself isn't causing any shaking or anything of the part, it really shouldn't be any different than measuring a stationary part. Just you can sort of place the instrument on the surface and let the conveyor do the rolling rather than you doing it.
No, good. Question from Israel: what could be the difference or affectation in process application for the correspondent W's?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question.
Israel, I've turned on your microphone, so now you're able to unmute it from your side. Would you mind elaborating a little bit on your question? If you look to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a microphone in a little red circle. If you click on that circle, you should enable your microphone.
Okay.
There you are. Yes, welcome.
Great. Thank you for your training. It's very helpful for us. And the question is about what kind of items in the process application, I mean, film thickness, belt speed, or something like that could affect higher or lower WA, WB, WD, dullness, etc. That kind of
Okay.
we
Yeah.
would like to know.
I mean, unfortunately, we can't make too many generalities on this because every paint system is different, and every paint system is going to have its own kind of ins and outs to it. But we do have another slide. Hold on.
Back to the bag of tricks.
I'm sorry. I will write it. I will write it in the chat room.
No. This is good. We like.
Oh, we're good. Yeah. So I think this might be what you're looking for, where if the various values are too high, what can cause that? largely when it comes to the smaller stuff, and you would intuitively kind of think this would be the opposite, and I kind of would, and maybe sometimes it is, because again, we can only generalize so much, but generally when the dullness or the shorter wave structures are too high, that has to do with the substrate or the the intermediary coats. Whereas if you're getting too much long wave, the WC, WD, WE, that has to do more with the top coat or with the clear coat. With the exception of dullness, that could be the clear coat as well. And yes, that could be directly related to the bell, or whether the spray might be too dry or things like that.
Okay. Does that help?
Yes, right.
Okay.
Exactly what we were asking for. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. And you had another question too. Would you like to ask that?
Yeah, right. About the optimum values of short wave and long wave, which could be?
The optimal values are 0. So, I mean, yeah, ideally you want to have a perfectly smooth surface. That just, that's not really practical. It doesn't really, the paint systems that are used aren't really going to produce surfaces that smooth, and the effort that would be required to produce, W values close to 0 for everything, just it doesn't happen. So it really is just about balancing them. And so one thing you want to do is you want to get used to looking at these structure spectra, because what you're going to do, and I know this kind of looks sort of chaotic right now, and difficult to interpret, but really what you're doing is you're figuring out what is a good looking surface for you. You always want to correlate this stuff to what you're seeing visually. So you want to figure out, all right, this surface looks really good. Let's measure it with the Wavescan, and then we're going to get a structure spectrum. And in this one, I would say that the best looking structure spectrum would be this sort of medium orange one here, the 30 micron curve. So you're gonna figure out what your curve looks like for your really good looking surface, and then you want to you can sort of look at a glance. You can compare future measurements, future curves to that sort of standard curve, and figure out if it's deviating too much, where it's deviating. Is it in the longer wave, the shorter wave, which W values are off? So that's one way you can evaluate it, is by comparing these structure spectra. That's a good way to sort of at a glance see how well your measurements are matching up with that sort of idealized curve. But there are other metrics you can use to figure out what is going to be the best combination of values. And if you'll forgive me while I look for a particular slide. That's not in here. Hold on.
If anyone has any other questions too, just log them in while he's pulling this up.
So several years ago, did I mute myself? Am I being heard?
Yeah, you're good. Yep, okay. You're good. You're good.
So yeah, several years ago, we came up with this balance scale, and this is meant to balance out the shorter wave structures with longer wave structures, specifically the WB and the WD. We actually have the equation for it here. So it's calculated solely on the WB and the WD value, and how well those shorter structures are balancing out those longer structures. So when we look at the balance chart, So the ideal balance value is 0, and that means that according to this equation, the WB and the WD are perfectly in balance. If the B value is negative, that means your longer wave structures are dominating. If your B value is positive, that means your shorter wave structures are dominating. So there's sort of a green zone here in the middle, hovering around the 0 value that you kind of want to be in, as close to 0 as you can get for this B value. And then we'll see here we have some structure spectra and how they correlate. So these all have a B value of 0. So these would all be considered to be in perfect balance according to that equation. Of course, the lower overall structure, the better. But if you are going to have some structure that you can't get rid of, you do want them to be in balance. And so you can see here, again, these all have a B value of 0, so they're all right on this axis. And these, I should say these here, these first 4 are in that green zone. Once you get to too much structure, it doesn't really matter as much how well they're balanced. It's still not going to look very good. So starting with this pink curve here, that's sort of getting to this sort of iffy zone. This yellow curve is sort of heavily into this iffy zone. This blue one, even though the balance equation would tell us that these are, a perfectly balanced surface, it's still not going to look very good because that WD is just too high overall. So this is a great metric for sort of making sure that your different values are in balance, but it's not the only thing. It's never just one thing that's going to give you the complete story. We can try to condense these scales down, these calculations down as much as possible. It's often good to look at a few different metrics that might work for you.
Good. Did that help also, Israel?
Yes, right. Thank you a lot.
All right, you're welcome. Thank you. Okay, next question here from Dustin. Are there generalizations that can be made as to which layer of paint is causing high values in each region, WA, WB, etc., assuming a primer, base coat, and clear coat paint system?
So that's pretty much the same question that was asked before. And that's, the best I could do is show you that slide again.
Yeah.
I think, hold on, stop sharing and then reshare. There we go. So I'd say in general, the shorter waves are, it's the substrate or the, the first coats that would cause problems with that. And then as you get to the top coat or clear coat, those are what are more influencing the longer wave structures.
Good. Okay, another question here. Can you comment on other topography tools in addition to the Wavescan?
So we do have a fairly new instrument called the Spectro 2 Profiler. That one's a bit different from this in that it does work on very low gloss, well, a range of surfaces from low to high gloss, so it doesn't have the limitations this one does. Let me put something up on that real quick.
Awesome. Great questions, folks. It's always good when Corey has to dig into the archives. Like I said, immediately following this presentation, you'll receive a link to this entire presentation, including this discussion at the end here. So there may be screen grabs and things like that that you want to take.
So this is it, the Spectra 2 Profiler. It's a bit of a beefy instrument because it does several things. It does 45-0 circumferential color measurement. So the same, if you're familiar with our Spectra 2 line of instruments, the Spectra 2 Go, Spectra 2 Guide, Spectra 2 Guide Pro, you're going to get the same great performance out of this for the color measurement as you would out of those. It also has our patented 60-degree gloss measurement. Of course, not unique to us, the 60-degree gloss, but we just do it better than everyone else. So you get that great gloss performance out of this instrument as well. But the truly unique thing about it is that it can measure texture, and I won't get too heavily into this just because we don't have a lot of time and I don't feel like it. But this is designed for measuring various types of textures in coatings from coarse paint, which you often see in like powder coatings, coarse glossy paint. It has a leather-like algorithm for measuring structured like plastics, structured like leather-like surfaces like vinyl that you would see on a car interior. So of course, it's important when building those car interiors. The interior has to match. The various parts have to match each other, just like the exterior does. So it's important control for these things, and also a fine algorithm, which gives you analysis of fine structured paints and also some plastics too. This could be applicable to certain structured plastics. So again, I won't go into all of this complicated stuff, but I'm sure we will be doing some webinar, at least one webinar this year on this in the future. So look out for that if you are interested.
Definitely. Yep. I think it's scheduled later in the year. But if this is of interest now, feel free to respond to any of the marketing emails you get. They'll come to either myself or my colleagues, and we'll forward them to Corey or your appropriate regional sales rep. Also, let's see, next question here. Can you elaborate on how the Wavescan instrument can be used in plastic film, specifically in color matching? Can it measure DL values?
No, so that's not really what the Wavescan does. DL it comes from color measurement. So L is one of the color coordinates, the LAB coordinates that tells you the lightness of the surface. So DL is the difference in lightness from one surface to another, and that you need a color measurement instrument for. So the Wavescan does not do color. It strictly does surface structure, wavy appearance, things like that. But we do have a line of color instruments, of course, as mentioned, Spectra 2 line of instruments. We have an exciting new benchtop 450 spectrophotometer coming out a little bit later this year. So yeah, if you are interested in measuring DL values, certainly reach out to us and we can talk about color instruments.
Yeah, we have a lot of specialists regionally and as well as at the headquarters here too. So if you're not quite sure what you need or what you're looking at, we can evaluate. Corey's usually involved. Evaluate your application and recommend kind of our best practices from what we've seen from our experience. So once again, just respond to any of the marketing emails and we'll get you in touch with the right people. Another question here. What is the influence of the base coat in the appearance? I know you've touched on this.
Yeah, again, that's hard to say specifically because every surface, every paint system is a bit different. So yeah, I can only show you that slide again. But if you have an interest in the Wavescan, if you don't currently own one, or if you do currently own one and you'd like us to sort of help you analyze your surfaces and figure out what's going on with your processes, we can sort of work with you on that as well.
Great. So other questions? What does is everyone working on? What challenges are you having? Corey's our resident expert here, so we have a little bit of time left here. Love to help you out however we can. Like I said, you'll get the recording from this immediately following. If you have any other follow-up questions, feel free to hit reply and we'll get you in touch with those folks. We do have a whole series of these office hours on a monthly basis, sprinkled with our 60 minutes presentations, which are more full-blown, 45 to 50-minute presentation. So you'll be seeing more invitations for them in the coming weeks. Are there frequent questions you get, Corey, that we haven't talked about here quite yet when it comes to appearance or appearance theory?
I should have been ready for that one, John.
I know I ask it everyone, no matter what the topic. And I know we do have robotic solutions for Wavescan as well, and Big Mac, I believe, too. So if you're looking at more of an automated solution, we can help there as well.
So with Wavescan, I guess I can talk a bit about the various scales we have, because we do have quite a number of scales, and it's always increasing because we work directly with various automakers to come up with scales that specifically suit their needs. Every automaker kind of looks at things a little differently and wants things calculated a little bit differently. And of course, as mentioned several times, every paint system is a bit different. So one company might be looking at something different from another. But generally, if you are an automaker or a supplier to an automaker, they're going to specify that they want to see certain scales, and they'll have certain specifications for those scales. And so the Wavescan does have just dozens and dozens of different scales that the various automakers use, and you can choose according to your spec, or if you're just trying to improve your own surfaces, if you're not working on a specification, you can just take lots and lots of measurements with the Wavescan. The recommendation whenever you're trying to come up with a QC system is always to just take lots and lots of measurements of various production parts, both those that look good and those that look not so good, and the full gradient in between. And it is very important when trying to come up with that QC system to relate the measurements that you're getting with what you're seeing visually, to rank different surfaces visually and see which measurements, which scales are best going to correlate with what you're seeing, and then come up with a QC system based on that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, we don't have any more questions here. We can give it another 30 seconds here, see if any last minute ones pop in here. Going, gone. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Hope you learned something. I always learn things from Corey. So stay tuned for the recording link as soon as we close this out. And also, if you have any questions or need any assistance, hit reply to any of the marketing messages you get. We'll put you in touch with the experts, and be on the lookout for the next web seminars and our office hours coming up. So with that, have a great day and take care. Thank you.